when the lawsuit documentation came out, and we got a little bit more evidence of how on-demand liquidity worked, that's when we found out that the banks and the institutions that are using the on-demand liquidity product specifically from Ripple, they don't hold the XRP. And even Ripple doesn't necessarily hold the XRP. Ripple, right, sells the XRP off to the market makers, and the market makers are holding that or even leasing it. Right? There's a lot of XRP that gets leased out from Ripple. And when we saw the documentation come out from the SEC lawsuit, and then I believe it was the 2022 market reports that really were eye-opening, because we tallied it up at the end of the year. They reported that they had sold off about 10 billion XRP over the course of the year, but then they showed how they bought back 9 billion or something like that. Like they'd almost bought back as much XRP as they'd sold off. And so we use that data point to address the FUD about Ripple dumps 1 billion XRP on us at the start of every month. Never been the case, never been true, completely false. It's ridiculous. It's just not true. And so we use that data point to address that FUD, but then also to understand how on-demand liquidity works a little bit better. When we combine that with what came out with the SEC lawsuit, that's when we started to understand, okay, what Ripple does is they're letting market makers and centralized exchanges build out that liquidity pool, is what we'll call it, right? They're building out the on-demand liquidity network. The network uses Uphold. Uphold is part of on-demand liquidity, right? They're a brokerage platform that works with other centralized exchanges and market makers, right? Uphold is part of Ripple's on-demand liquidity network. And so what Ripple did is they built out this network with centralized exchanges and market makers. And with the on-demand liquidity, right, one party, basically the XRP is being sold off to buy the currency on one end and bought back. Basically, it's being sold and bought back in one simple transaction, which allows both the parties on either side to not have to hold XRP, which Lewis kind of spun as this negative about how, this is the XRP utility that we all thought was going to take XRP to high prices. Now we find out that the banks and the institutions don't need to hold it, so now the utility doesn't drive value to XRP. Absolutely wrong. Completely wrong. You still have to have a pool of XRP, right? And so Ripple sets aside whether that's a